could get everybody seated. We're going to start the way we always start, and the most important thing we could do in the day, which is to start with prayer. So if we could get everybody seated and quiet, I'd appreciate that. This morning, leading us in prayer is our Chief Grassroots Officer, my lifelong best friend, Mike Ruthenberg.
Heavenly Father, we come before you today with gratitude and humility, thanking you for the gift of life, for safe travels, and for the privilege of gathering here in Indianapolis for this Race to Freedom National Grassroots Leadership Summit. Lord, we know we all face challenges at home, in our families, and across this land. Yet we also know that you use these struggles for good. Father, give us the strength to endure them, the wisdom to learn from them, and the courage to overcome them. Father, you have commanded us to love one another, even the ones that are hardest to love. Open our eyes to see you as you see us. Open our ears to listen with humility. Open our hearts and minds to receive new ideas, so that what we learn here we may carry home and strengthen our communities. We thank you, Lord, for the vision and courage of our COS founders, Mark Meckler and Michael Ferris, for our national team, for the countless grassroots leaders and activists who have given of themselves to defend liberty, and for our families and friends whose sacrifices have made our work possible. Father in heaven, as you look down upon us, you have created the largest self-governing grassroots movement this nation has ever seen. We thank you for the victories already won for the 19 states that have passed our resolution, and for more to come, and for the millions yet to be touched by this cause. God, as we begin this day of plenary sessions and breakout gatherings, we ask for your blessing. Let your Spirit guide our words, sharpen our minds, and shape our actions. Father, strengthen the relationships formed here. Protect our health. Bring healing where it's needed, and place your holy hand of protection over every family represented in this room. Lord, we ask for fresh fire, for renewed passion, humility, patience, and courage. May the summit ignite our hearts and empower our teams at home to advance the cause of liberty that you inspired in our founding fathers. We give all the glory to you, and we place this gathering in your hands. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. If you'll join me, stand and join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mike. I'd now like to introduce somebody that I met at Freedom Fest, which is a libertarian festival. You know, we go all over the country and we travel a lot to meet with people and spread the message. The best thing that ever happens when I go to any of these events is I encounter somebody I didn't know before who ends up changing my life and our lives for the better. And when I was at Freedom Fest, I met Lydia Abbott Drury. She's an incredible talent. She's sung the National Anthem for President Trump a couple of times, and she's going to sing it for you this morning. Lydia, please join us on stage.
Thank you. I'm going to be singing the fourth verse of the National Anthem, which is very fitting for what Convention of States stands for. Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war
blessed with victory and peace. May the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto: in God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
God bless America. Thank you so much.
How cool is that? A fellow Hoosier for you in Indiana. Another gem here in this state, which is incredible. So I just wanted to let you know, I should have mentioned this last night, that the governor named a day, he made a proclamation to name Article 5 Convention Day. You can see that proclamation out in the pre-function space out front. That's pretty cool here in Indiana, Article 5 Day. So this is going to be an amazing session. I hope you guys had a good time last night. Was it fun? Ice cream was good? Good social? You know, one of the things we did for this summit that is really important is we set aside a bunch of time for you guys to hang out. And you had time during the ice cream social last night. You know, we could be up here blathering away and doing what we do, but we think it's important for you guys to spend time together. We always do a post-summit event questionnaire. We want to know what you guys thought. And so the thing that happened in the past is the number one comment is that people wanted more time to be together and just hang out. And that seems particularly appropriate at this time in history. I know for me, last night was a little bit difficult, and getting a chance to fellowship and just hang out with people afterwards was really helpful to me. So I hope it was helpful to you guys too. You like spending time together? That works for you guys? You guys have a notebook that you guys got in your package. I hope you'll take notes. I think that's kind of important unless you remember everything, because I want you guys to take this stuff home to your teams at home. You know, we limit attendance at these things. Only so many people can make it. People have reasons they couldn't make it. Some people couldn't afford to attend. Some people just had other stuff going on at home. And some people just, there wasn't room in the room. And so it's up to you guys to be the leaders that I know you are, to take the notes and to bring this event back to folks at home. It's not the same as if you're here, but you guys can give them second best, so I'm counting on you guys to do that. You know, I talked about how I travel around the country and I get to meet amazing people everywhere I go in the grassroots, and that is honestly the single best part of what I do. I don't like traveling. You guys can probably figure out why. Being on airplanes is not glamorous. Being in hotels is not glamorous. But the part that I love when I go out on the road is meeting people. And I love people. I've just always loved other human beings. It's kind of my favorite thing to do. People ask, do you collect anything? The answer is yes, relationships. Like, I just love meeting people and getting to know people. And I happened to cross paths with an incredible American patriot. Some of you have probably heard his name. His name is Calley Means. And Calley works in the White House, and he is in charge of MAHA in the White House. And I think this is an incredibly important movement in America. This is something most people don't know about me. I sort of grew up in this movement. My grandparents owned the first health food store in Los Angeles, California. I was a little street rat in Westwood Village, just outside UCLA. I grew up in that health food store. My parents then followed in their footsteps, grew up in a health food store. You know, y'all see yogurt all over the shelves at the grocery store. When I was like 7 years old, we cultured our own yogurt because you couldn't buy yogurt in the grocery store. The idea of a smoothie was a weird thing to most people. We lived on smoothies in my house. No, we were not hippies. We were just in the business Very conservative family, just happened to run health food stores. My parents ultimately started a natural body care product manufacturing company, so I grew up there in this entrepreneurial lifestyle, but it crossed over with what we didn't call Maha then, but we now know as Maha. So I had a chance to cross paths with Calley. Calley's an incredible advocate for us, for our health, for the country's health inside the White House. There was just a huge Maha initiative announced. Calley was at the head of all that. He advocates for the health and wellness and everything that's necessary to make us great at a personal level, at the health level. We cannot be a great country if we're not healthy. He's the co-author of a book. If you haven't read it, I can tell you it changed my life. It changed my family's life. We were already sort of aware of health and nutrition and all this stuff, but I read the book Good Energy that he wrote with his sister, and it was transformational for me. And Patty was actually introduced to me by Lucy, my daughter, and her husband, Clayton. They read it first. I can't even count the number of copies that I've given out or recommended that people get. I take a little bit of credit for it being a best-selling book. So I don't know if Calley would agree with that. He is a senior advisor, I said, for Maha, but also he is an absolute diehard COS fan. I mean, this is one of the most amazing things. When I met him, he said, we're not going to fix this at the federal level. The states are the way to go. He loves COS. It's incredible. By the way, his wife just had a baby a few days ago. So the fact that we get Calley here today means his wife is a gem. I give her all the credit. I'm proud to introduce you to Calley Means.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. It's a great intro, and I just want to say, Mark, you don't need to hide from being a hippie. The conservative movement, what we're doing here, we are the counterculture right now, and we are the people standing for a lot of what the hippies used to stand for: free speech, individual empowerment, going against just blindly trusting the status quo. And I don't want to mince words here. I think what is happening in this room, what Mark is leading, what you guys are leading, is the most important issue facing the country. And obviously thinking a lot about my good friend Charlie Kirk, and I think we all feel, had some conversations with you guys. I think it comes up in conversations around the country. There's something unique happening in America right now, and really a tension and a feeling like we're at some kind of precipice. I think, clearly there's such a bright future ahead, but there, I think, is a larger degree of anxiety than we've seen in a very, very long time. And from being in DC, my thesis is that I think we're talking past each other, because politicians in DC are talking about finite policy reform. They're talking about slightly changing Medicare, Medicaid policy, slight tweaks to the education system, we just need to pass this immigration reform, we just need to pass this reform, to help and protect kids. We need to, slightly adjust military spending, we just need this quick budget fix. But I think that's really not resonating with the American people, because I think there's a deep sense, most people don't even fully realize it, but there's a visceral sense that we don't have a policy problem, we have a structural problem. We have a cultural problem. And I want to just give a quick story about how I came to really believing the work in this room, that it is one of the most important issues, maybe the most important issue facing the country, and talk about my journey devoting my life to these healthcare issues, what are now known as MAHA issues, and really seeing in the White House, seeing in DC, and being convinced we will not solve these existential issues without real structural reform. So just a quick story about myself. I grew up in Washington, D.C., young conservative, worked at the Heritage Foundation, entered for the Bush White House, worked on campaigns after college, and back then, this is about 15 years ago, but being a good young conservative, you go and after campaigns, work at public affairs firms, and I was very proud to work for the pharmaceutical industry, big food, the big spenders in Washington, D.C. Back then, being a conservative is about blindly trusting large institutions, and to me, these large companies could do no wrong. I got out of that, got into startups, but was really awakened by my sister. She was much smarter than me, biology student, Stanford Med School, surgeon. But she really shocked the family when she dropped out. She left abruptly, despite being the top of her surgical residency class. She left and really radicalized me, radicalized the family with this idea that every single patient she was operating on, and she was a head and neck surgeon, head and neck specialist, they weren't getting better. And she did, her number one surgery was called sinusitis. So somebody had such inflamed sinuses, they had to be knocked out, and she cut open their face and took out the remnants of their inflammation in their sinuses. But she realized that her patients kept coming back under her knife. And she wasn't curing anything. She was just cutting out the remnant of this inflammation. And she realized, she had researched at the NIH, as president of her Stanford class. I mean, she had the best credentials. And she realized 5 years into residency that she did not learn what causes inflammation. And she started researching on her own, asking about nutrition, asking about why an average sinusitis patient had 60 pages of charts and 6 other comorbidities on average. And she had never talked to these other doctors, these other specialists she was going to. She never talked to the inevitable, endocrinologist who was, handling the diabetes that the patient inevitably had. The patient almost always had depression, heart issues, kidney issues. She had never learned how to connect the dots and was actually reprimanded by her attending surgeon for starting to talk to patients about nutrition and root cause. She actually was told that she didn't go to nutrition school, so you don't need to talk about that. Real medicine is cutting people open. And taking kind of my political experience, it helped put the dots together that there's something really wrong, and it's larger than any partisan issue, but there's a real structural problem. Because what's happening in America is very dark. We live 7 years less than the Italians. We're not lazier than Italians. There's something structural happening. We spend 4 times more per capita on healthcare than the average European country, but again, live 6, 7, in the case of Switzerland and Japan, 10 years less than people in other countries. We've got the sickest kids literally with chronic disease of any society in human history. In the United States today, we have the highest pediatric cancer rates of any society in human history. We have the highest childhood obesity rates, diabetes rates. I think our childhood prediabetes rates are 8 times what they are in Europe. 38% of teens in the United States right now have prediabetes. Like it was 0, like a generation ago. So there's something wrong, and what we put together, and I think it's very simple, and I think this is hopefully what's been resonating with this Maha movement, is it's an incentive problem. And the problem is that we are being poisoned. I think in many ways it's not any individual one person, but we're being poisoned by design. And then the largest and fastest growing industry in the United States, which is the healthcare industry, with many, many good people, but as a demonstrable statement of economic fact, that industry profits when there are more sick patients. On issue number 1 with the poisoning, I don't think parents want their kids to be sick. I don't think 80% of US adults want to be obese or overweight. I don't think 94% of American adults want to be metabolically dysfunctional, fail at least one biomarker of metabolic dysfunction, HDL, triglycerides, obesity, blood pressure, blood sugar. I don't think they want this, but when you look at our incentives, the nutrition guidelines, we remember the food pyramid, but to this day, the nutrition guidelines recommend added sugar as a healthy part of a 2-year-old's diet. They demonize meat. Actually, steak is not allowed to be served in schools, in many cases in the military, because the nutrition guidelines actually demonize saturated fat, and the nutrition guidelines flow into what our schools and what our military can buy. Food stamps, SNAP is the 4th largest entitlement program in the country. It's $120 billion a year. You've got Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and SNAP. It's a massive program. And 70% of that goes to ultra-processed food. The number 1 item on food stamps, which 15% of our low-income, 15% of Americans, the lower-income Americans depend on for nutrition, is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. 10 to 15% of that goes to soda alone. So when we talk about being poisoned, we're talking about real incentives, real corporate capture. And then when we talk about that devil's bargain where the medical system turns a blind eye to that, not only turns a blind eye, but encourages that. It's just a simple fact. Pharmaceutical companies make more money when more pills are prescribed. Hospitals don't make money when beds are empty. They make money when beds are full. Through the complete insanity of Obamacare, insurance companies only can make a 15% profit margin, but are able to raise premiums to get that 15%. So they have a fundamental ingrained incentive from Obamacare to raise premiums as high as possible because they are capped on their profits, which is exactly what's happened. And if insurance companies have an incentive to raise premiums, that means they have an incentive for people to be more sick. This is not what anyone wants. And it's actually relatively simple when I think you look at these incentives that are holding the American people back, where, really, in many cases, all Americans can afford what they're served at schools, what they're served in the military, what they're incentivized to eat, what they're recommended to eat is ultra-processed food. We have a situation where 70% of a child's diet in the United States is ultra-processed. But that's 10% in Spain and Italy and France. There's something really wrong with our incentives here. And that's by design. It's through federal government co-option of our incentives and that healthcare. We don't have a free market healthcare system in any way, shape, or form. I think we have worse than a socialist system. I think we have a kleptocracy. We have a complete co-option of the largest industry in the country. Healthcare spending was 3% of U.S. income in 1940. Right now it's upwards of 25%. It's getting close to that. That's not the free market. It's a complete failure of our systems where this industry that is, again, great people and great innovations have come out of this industry, but they profit when more Americans are sicker for longer periods of time. They have co-opted our standard of care. They have co-opted and created a system where states, individuals have very, very little power. The standard of care, the rules at CMS, states have a gun to their head about following this top-down prescription of what should be done in certain medical situations from this standard of care that comes from the federal government. And right now, they're pushing for obese 6-year-olds. This is from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which informs the federal standard of care. They're saying that any overweight or obese 6-year-old should be getting a lifetime Ozempic shot. SSRI and antipsychotic drugs have gone up 8x among teenage girls in the last 15 years. We have a suicide and depression epidemic among teenage girls and just teenagers and young adults in general. It's the second leading cause of death for young adults. And I was shocked. I was at HHS with some panels of outside experts and internal experts at the NIH, and they said it's absolutely ridiculous anti-science misinformation to say that we shouldn't be prescribing more antipsychotic drugs, and that is actually how we can solve this issue. Statins, metformin, ACE inhibitors, all these chronic disease medications are skyrocketing among teens. 35 to 40% of teens are right now on a chronic disease medication, and again, when you look at this orgy of corruption between a scientific apparatus that is, I think, hopelessly bought off and hopelessly corrupt, and their connection to the federal government bureaucracy, we've really lost our way. And again, there's been this disconnect where I've had the privilege of talking about these issues, meeting Bobby Kennedy, connecting with the Trump campaign, connecting with Democrats, Republicans, everybody, and then feeling that there was this cultural and political underappreciated phenomenon where so many people are frustrated about these dynamics on health and can't quite put their finger on it. I was able to help connect Bobby Kennedy and President Trump and have a small insight into their relationship, and they bonded over this, but they weren't talking about a slight change to Medicare reimbursement standards. They were talking about something deeper, something structural, and I think that's what they talked about on campaign, and I think that's what resonated with people. And I think from this issue and being able to go in and see this movement evolve in the last 200 days, that's the disconnect. and I don't mean this as a negative, I mean it as a positive. I think President Trump and Secretary Kennedy particularly, they're focused on policy, but they're focused on something deeper. They're trying to put their finger on it. And I don't think most people fully understand what the answer is. And I think out of all the answers proffered for correcting this disconnect, you guys are on it. I think Americans are going to realize, and hopefully my story on health gives one example. It's how I got to this. We have to have structural reform. And I'm convinced that the answer is in the states. And I'm convinced the answer, of course, is through the genius of what our founders laid out. I'll just close by saying this on this. Thank you. When we think about MAHA, to me, the greatest policy accomplishments actually are relationships with the states. And I was thinking about some statistics that I think really elucidate the answer. I mentioned that SNAP stat, the food stamp. I mean, to me, it's one of the most criminal things we could possibly do to have a chronically sick, pediatric population, and then spend tens of billions of dollars to government-subsidized soda, Oreos, and Twinkies for them. In the past, less than the past year, because Bobby just endorsed President Trump just a year ago, 25 states, 25 governors have submitted waivers to the federal government to remove soda and candy from SNAP. Governor Brown was one of the first ones. Texas, Florida, the state right here, it's been an awakening and massive lobbying against that. I mean, Coca-Cola alone gets $4 billion direct from the federal treasury to that company every single year for soda. You can imagine how existential this was and how lobbied this was against. The governor said, enough, we're doing it. It's a tidal wave, and Democrats are going to start doing it even. It's 24 red states, 1 blue state so far. I think California's going to do it. I mean, this is sweeping the country and the states. There's a bill in the Senate to do the same thing. It has no co-sponsors. No co-sponsors. Meeting with senators, they say we can't do it. They're going to pull our donations. Not one co-sponsor, tidal wave. 10 states have passed, just in the last 6 months, pretty common sense bills to say, well, if we're going to spend money on school lunches, which we do, school lunches are 15 times larger than McDonald's, the largest fast food program in the country. 10 states have passed common sense bill to not, to serve more whole local food, to help local farmers, to take some dangerous chemicals that are banned in Europe out of our food supply and the school lunches. Zero movement in 20 years in Congress on that. I mean, what could be a more no-brainer policy? When we've got Medicaid budgets bankrupting states because of 95% of those Medicaid budgets go to chronic lifestyle conditions. What would be a more no-brainer situation than doing school lunches? Zero action on the federal level. In fact, there's a mass lobbying group saying that we need to keep school lunch spending low and ultra-processed food is fine. And I'll just note one more. Texas, the most lobbied bill in the state of Texas this year was a simple increase of transparency for for food labeling. Texas said that we've had enough with the federal government. We want to have more transparency for our consumers. We're not banning anything, just more transparency, some basic transparency in food labels. The single most lobbied bill, the CEOs of almost every major international food company in the world flew and lobbied the governor of Texas. They signed that bill, and the governor said that it was the most positive reception he's ever seen for a bill in recent history. No action on the federal government level. I just think this is an example. The answer is in our states. It's returning power to the states. That's my journey on realizing why this issue is so important. Thank you. Let's mark them out. This one?
Yeah, that's perfect. All right, so many questions. This is such a cool opportunity, and you're such a unique person generally, but also a unique person to be inside the White House and inside the federal government. And you know, I had some of this conversation a couple of weeks ago. Thank you for meeting with me over at the EOB. By the way, he works over at the EOB, and this building, the Executive Office Building, if you've never been inside of it and you get a chance to tour it, it's so beautiful. It is what architecture should be in Washington, D.C. So that's got to be cool to work in that
It's very
building.
cool.
Yeah.
It never gets old.
Yeah. So you've been inside. You've seen the beast from the inside. You and I talked a little bit about this. You're not an insider. You're a businessman, an entrepreneur. You built a great company. What's it like being inside the federal government?
I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I think I think President Trump has the opportunity to be one of the 3 or 4 best presidents in American history, and I think it is a green light to push, and I think there's a realization that, you know, this talk about the deep state, the talk about taking on this entrenched bureaucracy, it is the most important issue in the country. There's nothing that's going to happen without structural reform, and I think a hallmark of what President Trump is doing is that for most of my life growing up in DC, there was this kind of cocktail party complaint, oh, politicians, there's so many problems out there, but they're not handling the big issues. This administration is taking on every big issue all at once. I mean, we're talking about war and peace, immigration, our federal budget, the education. They've shut down the education department. We're talking, we're talking about foundational conversations about the healthcare, which I've been describing, which really get to, I think, spiritual and cultural conversations. I mean, you just got, taking on the deep state. It is incredible, and I think there's a realization we're not going to solve everything right now. Actually, what will really change the world is a cultural and systemic conversation, and I think they're legitimizing and changing the Overton window culturally where we can talk about a lot more, and I think it's not surprising that there is a violent backlash to that conversation.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that to the extent you can without alienating people. What's the difficulty? Like, what is the backlash inside? When you run into roadblocks, where do those roadblocks come from?
The Senate.
The Senate. It's pretty interesting, huh?
It's the Senate. I think that the consolidation as much as possible under the current system into the executive, which is probably something we all are a little bit wary of. I think given the absolute, post-Cold War failure, and I think it's an utter failure that threatens the continued exceptionalism of the United States of our Senate. I think President Trump trying to do as much as he can on his own is inevitable to get anything done absent structural reform. I think we are at a real standstill. And by the way, many leading senators will, I'm sure they have told you, will say this off the record, it's not working. Just that SNAP bill, not one co-sponsor when we're government subsidizing soda for kids. Every senator is able, senators are able to get bought off, and even if many of them are good, there's so many ways to scuttle progress or scuttle real reform. Any issue, no matter how unimpeachable or how no-brainer or how much voters voted for that issue, there's tremendous ways the Senate can slow down progress that the White House wants to advance and slow down any real chance of legislative reform.
I mean, honestly, that it surprises me that you say that. It's not that I have respect or a lot of respect for the Senate. It's just I have less respect for the agencies. I would have expected much bigger pushback from the agencies than the Senate.
A lot of the bastardization of the agencies, which is a real root cause problem, is from a complicit Senate that voted for, one by one over 20, 30 years, followed, I think, this invisible hand of incentives that has created a unimaginably complex and impossible to understand bureaucracy that is the exact result of what forces have been incentivized to create. And I think a lot of this absolutely hopelessly broken bureaucracy is from rules that were put in by the Senate. And there's been no oversight, and there's been encouragement of it.
Right. So as a guy who is used to running a company, which means you kind of run it the way you want to run it, how difficult is it to have to work within the constraints of the government?
I think it's clear, I think, to everybody that it is the great opportunity we have is right now because there's such a green light to push through this stuff. And I think it's being really aggressively conflicted. So there's a green light. I think there's hope because a lot of stuff just can be done. I mean, the executive branch has a lot of power. The way the bureaucracy is created is it's designed to slow things down because there's so little accountability anywhere and so many different people in the bureaucracy can scuttle it or delay it. And delay is, I think, the great weapon of the deep state. But there's a green light from the top to take this on. I believe when it comes to healthcare, we've achieved more public health reform than any administration in modern history. I mean, in 1 year, we are reforming the nutrition guidelines, which I mentioned, which have huge impact. We're initiating through the executive branch front of pack food labeling to give Americans more transparency. We've worked with states to reform SNAP. We're lowering drug prices to get them more in line with Europe. And you know, I think we've done some structural things that will be clear as time goes on, but we're really taking on the standard of care, the corruption in how we get health care, the fact that Medicare, Medicaid, their quality metrics are on whether you're taking a pill, not on whether you're healthy. We're reforming things like that. We're giving patients more flexibility, you know, not the top down, but HSA. So we're doing a lot. But again, I think that's the most important thing of getting those policy successes is showing, I think, culturally and showing the country that, like, we can have a better way. And the only way we're really going to solve that is if this momentum we're seeing from this administration fuels efforts at real structural reform, which I think this is the greatest example of. I think this is a 10-year journey, and it must result in structural reform. It must.
So you get to work very closely with Bobby Kennedy, who is one of the most controversial and yet the most highly rated, most loved by the public member of the administration. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like? What's your relationship with Bobby like, and what's it like to work with him?
I mean, the word spiritual comes to mind. I really do think he's touched a spiritual vein in the American public. He and President Trump are the two most popular political figures by far in America, according to Gallup, and a lot of recent polls, and they're the two most maligned, which is just very interesting. I think Americans are seeing through the violent opposition to change. Bobby Kennedy is the first HHS secretary that isn't an appendage of corporate interests that profit from when we're sick, and he sits at meetings with the NIH, with the FDA, the CMS, and we talk about how kids can be healthier. We talk about how we can get healthier food on a child's plate. We talk about how we can inspire Americans to exercise. It's like unbelievably wholesome. There's no secret like master plan other than trying to lead inspire on an individual level around kitchen tables more, awe and curiosity about the interconnectivity of our bodies and why we're actually getting sick, which is simple. 95% of healthcare costs are chronic lifestyle conditions. It's very simple. And that's being obfuscated and gaslighted by the medical industry. He's also, I really admire his bravery. I mean, it is weird that we're being so aggressively lobbied and he's so aggressively attacked, not for even really policy, but for asking questions about taboo topics like vaccines. It's not a conversation on some of these issues. It's like you literally, there's lobbying to not study it, to not study certain issues. And he does gravitate to issues, whatever you think of that issue. He gravitates to issues that people are saying, don't ask questions about this, because that's probably something that we need to look at. And he's very brave. And I would just also add, just unbelievably empowering to his team. He has an incredible team around him. Jay Bhattacharya at the NIH, Marty McCary, Dr. Oz. He's just a giant of a leader where he has set this mission and then has just providing air support just for his team to just run, and then President Trump calls him almost every day and says, "I got your back. Do whatever you need to do." So it's very inspiring.
Awesome. Okay, for everybody in this room to kind of get personal about what we can do, you've written this book, changed my family's life. For everybody in this room, if they could do one thing from your book to make their health better and their family's health better, what would that thing be?
So the first chapter of the tips talks about understanding what's in your body. To answer your question specifically, I highly recommend if you or your kid or a family member has nagging symptoms or has a feeling that they're not feeling their best, or acute issues, I highly recommend really understanding what's going on inside your body and getting a functional medicine blood test. I have no relation to this company, but there's a company called Function Health. There's other companies that do this where you can go and get a full readout of what's happening in your body. A couple of years ago, when I was on this journey, I got my just standard blood test from the doctor, and they said, "You're great, go on your way." I showed it to my sister. She's like, no, you have blaring metabolic dysfunction. You are like going to get like some diseases and die early unless you address this. And I go back to the doctor, I'm like, "Is this true?" They're like, "Yeah, it's true." I'm like, "Why didn't you say that?" They're like, well, your levels weren't at a treatable range yet, so we just have an algorithm where if you're at a treatable range for certain indicators, we'll prescribe you a drug. There's much deeper analysis you could do on your various cholesterol levels, ratios of certain attributes that give you a very clear picture, nutrient deficiencies, things like that. So I think having more awareness of actually what's happening inside your body, which can happen from these deeper dive blood tests, is really, really important. And then you can create a more personalized diet and supplement exercise plan and really know what's going on. We have no awareness of what's happening inside our body. When it gets to food, I mean, I thought this was so simple. I told our editors, I'm like, this is just so basic, writing these simple like shopping lists and simple concepts, and everyone knows not to eat ultra processed food, but like the reaction has actually been like, I think people are clamoring to hear these simple, it is simple. Like if you can cut 3 ingredients out of your kitchen, which is added sugar, I do think seed oils are a real problem, canola, soybean, safflower, and then processed grains, any type of enriched wheat. The processing takes the fiber off, and which blunts the glucose impact. And I think there's a lot of other problems, and it turns into sugar in the blood. But if you can cut those 3 things from your diet, I think you're 70% there. I really believe that at HHS, and this is barely hyperbolic, I kind of if we fired every single nutrition research grant, which has been just totally just PR for the food industry, big food, if we cut most public health programs and just have a national effort for people to get their 5 metabolic biomarkers in line and understand them, which again, triglycerides, HDL, their weight, blood pressure, blood sugar. If you get those 5 biomarkers optimized, and 94% of Americans don't have those optimized, by definition, you don't have type 2 diabetes, which is a totally, almost entirely preventable and reversible condition. You almost, by definition, wipe out heart disease, which is the #1 killer of Americans. You also, things you don't expect, like Alzheimer's, it's now called type 3 diabetes. It's downstream of diabetes, many forms of cancer. You actually solve trillions of dollars, I think, of annual budget. We spend 28% of our budget on healthcare right now. We spend 11% on defense and intelligence. It's growing faster than anything else. You actually, those 5 biomarkers, and I think just a public health message of eat real food. Eat real food. But those are some principles.
Okay, we're just about out of time, so one last question for you. You just had a new baby. Tell us a little bit about your family, and how did you find such an amazing wife who would let you come to this after having a baby?
Oh, man. She seemed okay with it. I might be in the doghouse a little bit. But I had to.
You snuck out early in the morning.
I had to be here. I had to be here. And this is really important to me. And I know, I could feel it in the room. I know there's something, we're onto something here. I think this group is going to change the world.
So this is your second baby,
Yeah,
right?
second baby. This has all been an unexpected journey. I met my wife at business school. She was actually, we started a company, not in health, e-commerce. She was my boss. She's an incredible woman. And
My wife's still my boss. so
yeah, and this whole journey's been, again, it was just a year ago that Secretary Kennedy endorsed President Trump. I moved to Palm Beach after the election and just whatever I could to help Bobby kind of prepare with the transition. Got brought in as a special government employee. Put my company on hold, and continuing to just stay in the fight. So life's been turned upside down, but I am just so grateful for my wife. She's been super flexible. My sister's going through the whole Senate process again.
Yeah,
it's
pray
pretty
for
crazy,
Casey.
but for
We
Surgeon
need to get
General.
her confirmed as Surgeon General.
And we've just been. I'm super just grateful to have found this this issue that's so important. I think it's so positive. But I think growing up in DC, I've also been ready. When you try to do something disruptive, it's very toxic out there. I think was another reason we need structural reform.
Ladies and gentlemen, Calley Means,
Thank you.
thanks for being with us. Thanks for being a friend to COS.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank your wife for us.
Thank you.
Quick announcement, I don't know if this is one of ours, but there's a black Jeep Wagoneer, license FL917 AAA parked in the fire lane, and they're getting ready to tow it. So if it's yours, let's see who's gonna run out right now. So one of the things we love to do at our summits is we love to have Mark Levin with us, and we did invite him to the summit, and unfortunately for us, fortunately for him, he's on vacation right now. Y'all know, I think Mark's the hardest working guy in media on the conservative side of the aisle. The guy does radio, the guy does television, he writes books. It's just a constant stream of intellectual effort for Mark on behalf of the entire movement. And to be honest, Convention of States, he talks about Convention of States more than anybody else in the media. So when I saw that he was on vacation when we were supposed to be doing this, I was mortified because we're gonna miss him. But I was also gratified that he's actually taking some time off. And so Julie had planned a vacation for Mark, his wife Julie, and so he couldn't be with us. But as is the case, he loves you guys, he supports you, and so he made this video for you guys.
Hello, my fellow Americans and believers in Convention of States. I want to thank you for everything you're doing to promote this, because this is the only way we will actually get our Constitution back. There's a recent example of this. Just a few weeks ago with the Big Beautiful Bill, which I support strongly because there's big beautiful things in the Big Beautiful Bill. Still, the spending in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure you've objected to it, I've objected to it, we're always objecting to it. In fact, people in Washington claim to be objecting to it. Some of them are serious about it, but it never happens. It's never going to happen. It cannot happen. The way politics works in the nation, the way politics works inside the Beltway, the way politicians work, they're never going to slash government spending. I'm not even talking about a balanced budget amendment, which isn't even something that I'm all that high on. Limiting the growth of government to a percentage of the gross of the growth of the GDP. That's what Milton Friedman talked about. That's right. Many of you have seen my book, The Liberty Amendments. There are proposed amendments in there that I think are crucial to getting our Constitution back to the structure that was intended, and that includes spending, borrowing, and taxing significantly. And of course, as you know, being crucial to Convention of States, states have already passed resolutions. And those resolutions are what we need to get in place. That's what we need to do. And so we're watching this debate over spending, and they prove to us yet again, as they have before and before that and before that, Washington is never going to cut spending or cut the debt. It can't. It can't. It won't. Which is why we have Article 5, which is why George Mason said what he said at the Constitutional Convention. Basically, when Congress screws up, don't expect Congress to fix it. So it's going to be the bottom-up effort through the state legislatures pushing through to a convention of states, having a convention of states in which these issues are debated and hopefully adopted. Then it goes back, as you know, to the states for the same ratification process, 3/4. That's a big number. This is hard. It's not easy. It's hard. Despite what our critics say about how we're the ones who are going to blow up the Constitution. The very people who've blown it up, by the way, condemn us. But I'm watching this play out. Then I'm watching Elon Musk say, I'm going to form a third party because we have to fight the spending and the debt. And I came in and I said, first of all, it won't work. It never works. The states are not set up for it, and many states will sabotage it. Whatever you think of it, it's not going to happen. So why don't you get behind Convention of States? Spend some of your money on that. I thought the same thing about certain members of Congress who beat their chest over and over again about the debt, who are not backers of Convention of States, or if they are, it's very tepid. Yeah, you can put me on your list, and then we never hear from them again. Now, we're not going to rely on federal politicians or billionaires to get this done. But it would be nice if they contributed to the effort. At least that's my view. But most of all, I want to thank you. There are millions and millions of us who believe in this Convention of States. A few years ago, they never heard of it before. It's our Constitution. We got to get these state legislatures and these state legislators, whether they be Assembly House members or state senators, to act. More of them to act, more states to vote. Because if we save this republic, it's going to be you who do it, and it's going to be Convention of States that does it. The power handed to we the people at the lowest level of government. We the people in our neighborhoods, in our communities. The power was given to you and me in the Constitution to try and get this done. So I want to thank you all for being here. You're the best of the best. You're the great patriots. I want to thank Mark and his beautiful wife for leading such a fantastic group, Convention of States. And to my dying breath, I'm going to continue to support this movement because I know what you know. This is the make or break movement. God bless to each and every one of you.
There's a reason they call him the Great One, right? Man, I love that man. He's just such an interesting guy. He does so much. I don't know if you guys know this. You know, when famous people like Mark Levin write books, normally they have a research team that does all their research for them, compiles all their research. I've talked to people who've been at Mark's house while he's writing a book, and he has a huge dining room table, and it is just covered with stacks of books that have yellow tabs in them. He does all of his own research. He doesn't have anybody help him with his writing. He doesn't have anybody help him with his research. All that stuff is stuff that he compiles. It's in his head. That's why his heart is so true when he talks about this stuff. And we are just blessed and honored to have Mark Levin as a supporter, right? So one of the things, you know, I get all these cards. They give me all the notes, what I'm supposed to say about people when they're coming up. And so there's an official bio, and then there's Mark's bio. The official bio is what I'm supposed to read, which I will read and for our next guest, but there's other stuff I want to say about him. So our next guest is Dr. Tom Lindsay, and he is the Higher Education Policy Director for Next Gen Texas at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We love the Texas Public Policy Foundation, by the way. They were our first institutional supporter. Before anybody else, they stepped up and endorsed us. He has more than 2 decades of experience in education management and instruction, including service as a dean, a provost, and a college president. He's a proud endorser of COS and has served as a commissioner for the simulated Article 5 convention. So that's the official bio. The unofficial bio, the Mark Meckler bio, is he's a friend. And not just a friend to Convention of States, which he is a great friend to Convention of States. He served as the 10th Amendment Center Director at Texas Public Policy Foundation the first time we were working our way through the Texas legislature, and he was an incredible champion for us. One of the best events we held was a symposium at Texas Public Policy Foundation that he hosted. I mean, I just have such great memories of it. And then a lot of you know my daughter Lucy Vanderlaan, who works for us as our operations director. She's phasing out to be a full-time mom, but she worked with Tom when she was at Texas Public Policy Foundation. And they developed a relationship that is, as close as I can describe it, Tom is like Lucy's mentor and adopted grandfather. And so for me, Tom's not just a supporter of Convention of States, but Tom's part of the family, the COS family, and our family, the Meckler family. So it's really an honor to introduce my friend, Tom Lindsay.
Good morning, everyone. Well, I want to thank Mark for that very gracious introduction. I'll try to live up to it here, but I'm still appreciating and reflecting on everything we heard from Mark and Governor Braun last night. I thought that was an incredible presentation and really gave us inspiration and marching orders. I've been asked to talk about the education of the future leaders of America. And when you think about it, people talk about and debate education policy all the time. And it gets very complicated, which it shouldn't. What does education mean? Education means our future. Right? And the question of what should be the education of our future leaders goes all the way back to the founding. And our third president and the author of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, he gave what I think is the best answer to the question, what should the education be for our future leaders in American democracy? And his statement was this, and I quote, he said, "Any nation that expects to be both ignorant and free expects what never was and never will be," unquote. Yeah. To put it in one sentence, you can't defend what you don't even understand. Right? And that's where we are right now. Don't take my word for it. They did a national survey of Americans using the U.S. citizenship test. Now, first the good news. 90% of immigrants to this country pass the citizenship test first time. Now the bad news. Only 19%, 19%, of native-born Americans under the age of 45 can pass the test. Right? It gets worse. It's only 10 questions. It gets still worse. You only have to get 6 right. And then to put the cherry on the top of bad news, there are multiple choice questions. Yeah. You can't defend what you don't understand. If we wonder why are the young people, not the ones in this room, but why don't young people understand that that living in this country, they're sitting on a pile of candy while they whine? Well, it's because they don't know. I don't blame the kids. I blame we who are supposed to act like adults and give them the civic education that's necessary for the perpetuation of our democracy. Right? Now, the civic education we need depends on the answer to a prior question. What does it mean to be an American? Well, part of what makes America exceptional is that, unlike all other countries in the history of the world, becoming an American doesn't depend on how you look or where you came from. What it depends on is your understanding and embrace of the theory of justice that informs the construction of our Constitution and its laws, by which I mean the Declaration of Independence, the principles for which Abraham Lincoln fought and died for. Right? We are not a country simply defined by demographics or ethnicity or anything else. We're defined by our assent to a creed. We are a creedal community. Right? Where do we find that creed? In the famous second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, where it's presented the American theory of justice, which I believe is justice. It consists of 4 self-evident truths. The first and most important of which is that all human beings are created equal. That very premise, from which the other 3 follow, is what is being debated. It's what's at stake today, because our enemies denied the truth of the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence calls for colorblind meritocracy. When it says equality, it means equality of opportunity. Sad to say, and you all know this, our kids are being taught in the universities not equality, but what is called equity. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Equity doesn't mean equality of opportunity. It means equality of outcomes. The only way you can get equality of outcomes is to deny people equality of opportunity. Right? That's what I mean when I say the stakes in this battle couldn't be higher. Now, what does the Declaration mean by equality? Really 3 dimensions: psychological, ethical, and political. Psychological meaning simply in mind. What it means is this: the founders knew there are differences among us in intelligence and all other abilities. That's a product of God's gifts. But what they said was, the differences in intelligence among human beings, while they can be profound, are quantitative. Whereas the difference between the least wise human being and the smartest dog, we'll call him Rin Tin Tin, are qualitative. So what does that mean? That means we are neither beasts nor gods. Right? And I mean, humanity finds itself in a sort of halfway house. Right? We have reason, which is divine. We have bodies and passions, which is animal, and we're a mix of the two. And everything, both beautiful and terrible in humanity, arises from that mix of reason and passion. Right? From this truth of equality in a psychological or intellectual sense comes ethical equality. Because we're neither beasts nor gods, no person can claim a right to rule over another in the manner in which we rule over our dogs. And no one can say that I'm under an obligation to serve another as a beast would serve a human being. And then finally, that leads to political equality. If we're all free and equal, well, then how do we have legitimate rule? How do we get people to do anything? Answer: among free and equal human beings, justice consists in the consent of the governed. So psychological, ethical, political. That's what the Declaration means, and most importantly, it means equality of opportunity, meaning meritocracy. Now, from this principle of equality comes our inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Important thing here that, again, students aren't taught in the universities. Everybody gets that it means, well, government can't take away our rights, our inalienable rights. I mean, they can do it, but they can't do it legitimately. Others can't alienate our inalienable rights. But what it also means, and what is lost today, we can't alienate our inalienable rights. You hear that all the time these days in defenses of abortion, defenses of the right to die. It's my body, right? I have absolute control. No, you don't. As the philosopher John Locke said, you're not your own. There was an author to your life. And so Locke had a prohibition on suicide. Why? Because if I have the right to alienate my inalienable right to liberty, then the majority, acting in my name, because that's how democracy works, can decide that I have alienated my rights. But you can't do that as long as our students are educated in the fact our inalienable rights are given by God, contrary to Tim Kaine, who thinks our rights come from government. Right? Yeah. And it's from the fact that we are free and have inalienable rights that consent arises. That's the third self-evident truth of the Declaration. And then finally, and this of course is the deepest level of the American Revolution. In the past, I mean, you had Magna Carta, etc. What was that? That was a governing body, in that case a king, who had absolute power and said, okay, I'll give you a little. Right? The American Revolution turned that upside down. The people have absolute power. They give some of it to government, but only to protect the purposes for which government came into being in the first place. Right? That was the revolutionary concept. We are no longer the servants of government. Government becomes our servant. That changed the world. I mean, this is the indispensable core of democratic education. This is what we used to and should again teach our students. Why? There's a statement attributed to Abraham Lincoln that says this: the philosophy taught in the classroom in this generation will be the philosophy practiced in the legislature in the next generation. Think about a generation raised believing that DEI is justice. Imagine, well, you don't have to imagine, we see it. We see it, right? That's the deepest level of the intellectual battle that we're fighting. If we restore the sort of education, meaning in our founding principles that I've briefly outlined here, then with that education, our young people it would be much more easy for them to see the falsehoods that the left peddles every day, not simply in the political sphere, but most alarmingly in the classroom itself. Right? They would understand that equity or equal outcomes is not only unnatural, it's absolutely contrary to the American experiment in self-government, which is to say, you can have the principle of equality of opportunity and meritocracy found in the Declaration, or you can have DEI, but you cannot have both. Right? If our students were educated in this, they would understand the vital importance of freedom of speech, an issue very much being debated right now, as we know, in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. If our young people were educated in this way, they'd come to agree with Abraham Lincoln that America constitutes, quote, the last best hope of earth, unquote. Thank you very much.
This is so great because this is one of my favorite things to do is just sit around and talk to Tom. So I kind of want to take you back to the beginning of your career. What is it that brought you into the field of education in the first place?
Well, I never would have majored in education, and I didn't, because it's part of the problem. In fact, one of my solutions to our problem would be to abolish all the education schools. So, but what I did do was I got my degree in political philosophy. I taught for a number of years, became an administrator for my sins, and about 15 years ago, I and a group of friendly board members tried to reform a liberal arts college in Chicago. A liberal arts college that had been so taken over by the left that they actually had Bill Ayers come and speak. Yes, and they didn't even ask the person who was president at the time. They just did it. So it was a mess, and we got within one board vote of changing it. And then I realized we've got to change all of higher education. I mean, trying to take back one school, yes, that's a good effort, but this is a systemic problem. So I went to the Texas Public Policy Foundation I failed to change one school in Chicago, so I thought now I'll try to change all of them in Texas.
I mean, honestly, in Texas, it's an easier task than Chicago, probably.
It's a low bar.
So you came to Texas Public Policy Foundation. What did you start working on first when you got there?
Well, one of the first things that I worked on was Convention of States, because I was doing education and also the 10th Amendment Center. And I'll tell you something, you know, they haven't polled students and how many of them know about Article 5. That would make us all cry. But when I met you and when we agreed to endorse and we did that summit, I started doing serious research on this, wrote a paper on it, and I came to realize this is the way. This is legal. This is constitutional. This can't be overturned, right? And not only that, we're talking about education. Imagine the educational effect it'll have on the whole country when the people realize or are told, maybe for the first time, this is your country. Right? You can change it.
So one thing I know about you and really admire is that you're a perpetual student. And
I am.
we were even talking backstage about raising kids, and you never stop learning about this stuff. So what do you recommend if people in here want to do foundational reading about our country? Where do you start? Like, can you give us a kind of a book list to start with?
Yeah. We were fortunate a few years back to get a bill passed in the Texas legislature, signed by the governor, called the Informed Patriotism Bill, which is a quote from Ronald Reagan's farewell address. And what it does, it requires now, all Texas students now, when they do civics, they must study the Declaration, the Constitution, Federalist 10, which is the repudiation of DEI, if you're looking for sources, Federalist 51, one of the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. Because King always took us back to the Declaration of Independence. He said it's a good document, live up to it. We don't need to change things. We just need to live up to our own aspirations.
So that's a good list. You mentioned Federalist 10. I know we always have interest in the organization about the Federalist Papers generally. Is there a version with interpretation that you recommend as kind of the definitive?
Yeah, well, it is a problem. I wrote an American government textbook about 10 years ago, and I came to realize, because I've been teaching in colleges since the 80s, I came to realize I needed to annotate this for students. And so I've done that. Now, I'm sure others have done it too. I'm not trying to sell it. It's out of print anyway.
We'll buy yours.
No, it's out of print. But just look for one that's annotated, because that can be an issue. And as we know, we're not helping ourselves if our message isn't understood. We've got to take pains to make it understood, right? And we're fighting a hard battle because our education system isn't helping for them to understand it.
Same question about the Declaration of Independence. Is there a definitive discussion of that you would recommend to folks?
Here's what I would recommend, and you can find this online. Go to the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. Right? When I teach American government, I spend a lot of time on the Declaration and slavery, since the left seems to think that somehow repudiates the American founding. You know, in the Declaration, Jefferson lists a whole bunch of charges. And with good rhetoric, it goes from least to worst. In the first draft of the Declaration, the last charge, meaning the most serious charge, Jefferson writes, King George III has declared cruel war on human nature itself, bringing into captivity men who have done him no harm. And in the original draft, Jefferson puts men in capital letters. So anybody has any question of whether all men are created equal, included African Americans, the answer is a resounding yes. Now, why isn't that in the one that got approved? You know the answer. Half the country would have said, we're not joining your revolution. Now, if that had happened and they said, well, but we've got the right principle, how likely would half of this new country been able, how likely is it that they would be able to beat what was at the time the most powerful military in the world? No. So, for the sake, and to make it worse, how many slaves would have been freed if they had done that? 0, right? Nobody teaches that to students anymore because the whole emphasis is on the founders are bad, the founders are evil, the founders were racist, they were rich, they were white. That's what our students get, and of course, that's poison.
Yeah, I want to stay on that same subject because this comes up all the time, the 3/5 compromise. And people say that shows how racist
Yes.
they were because slaves, black men were only counted as 3/5 of a human being. Could you discuss that?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring it up because I hear that all the time. And that argument was never made, certainly not by the people who were there who knew, up until about 50 or 60 years ago. Here's what it was about. And this is an easy way to show people that it's completely wrong to say that the 3/5 compromise means that the founders at the convention thought that the slaves were only worth 3/5 of a human being. If that were true, which side, the North or the South, do you think would want them to count for a full person? Yeah, I know, I understand, yeah. Here's what happened. South wanted them to count for full, one person, for representation, that's right. The North said, they're not even citizens, you can't count them. But they made a compromise. The South, if it had the slaves count for a full person, yes, they would have had more representation in the House, but they also would have had a higher tax burden. So the South bought some tax relief, right, from the North. That's what, right? If you want to be cynical about it, you could say this was a political bargain between buyers and sellers, but it had nothing to do with the humanity of the slaves.
See, these things are really important that we know these things because we have to be able to do, to go back to kind of the theme that we started this with, we have to be able to do what Charlie Kirk did.
Yes.
Which is to sit in front of people who oppose our ideas and debate those ideas and repudiate these ridiculous ahistorical claims. So I think that's a really important one. So I want to stay on this theme and move forward to the Constitution itself. You know, I think it's a pretty easy document to understand. It was written for regular people like us. Is there a book you recommend on the Constitution?
Yes, there's a short book and a long book. The short book would be Martin Diamond, The Founding of the Democratic Republic.
Okay. Haven't read that one, so that'll go on my list.
All right. The long book would be Republics, Ancient and Modern, by Paul Ray, R-A-H-E. He's a professor at Hillsdale College.
And a supporter of COS, I might
And a
add.
supporter of COS. And I will tell you this, that book, it's a long read, is a liberal education in itself. And I mean liberal in the true sense, meaning liberating, right? An education in and through and for liberty. That's what liberal education is supposed to mean.
Okay, so let's keep going. We go from the Constitution to the ratification. Do you have a book on the ratification you recommend?
Well, Diamond addresses the ratification and the debates there. I'd say that'd be the place to start.
Okay. And I'd throw in Pauline Maier.
Oh, yes.
M-A-I-E-R. Her book, Ratification. It goes through the ratification debates in all the colonies. It's incredible. If you're a geek like we are in history, the University of Wisconsin has a 37-volume set, which is actually it's on my shelf, believe it or not. I don't covet a lot of possessions. I love that set. My goal is to read it before God takes me from this earth. I'm in volume 3, so
Well, that's
so pray for a long life for me. But that literally is everything ever published and unpublished. Like even speeches that people were going to give, they thought they were going to be at the ratification convention in their state. They didn't get chosen. If they wrote a speech about it and somebody got a hold of it, it's in those books. So it's all online. I have the hard copy just because I like it, but it's searchable online. It's an
Yes.
incredible resource. All right, so let's move on from the ratification and all of those debates. Well, let's stay in that debate. How about on the Anti-Federalists? Anything that you like on the Anti-Federalists?
Well, look, the Anti-Federalists, they lost. Now, they lost because they agreed that the Articles of Confederation were too weak. But they didn't have a better alternative. So But that doesn't mean that their concerns were not valid. They raised very important concerns about a big centralized bureaucracy far away from the people that would be out of touch. Now, this is just imaginary stuff, but that would be far out of touch with the people. They worried about judicial tyranny. Jefferson called it judicial oligarchy. So, did they have valid concerns? Absolutely, they did. And in fact, we're still debating those concerns today.
And so you would say just read the Anti-Federalist.
Yeah, Brutus, read Brutus's, and in fact, again, Diamond, in the Diamond book, he will point you to that and he summarizes it, as does Ray.
Okay.
Yeah, their arguments need to be taken seriously.
Let's keep moving forward through history. Then we get the, obviously, the Bill of Rights, not called the Bill of Rights
No,
at the time.
not for 100 years.
And there were not just 10, right? So why don't you talk about the original Bill of Rights, for the two that didn't get ratified immediately?
Well, you know, it's very interesting because what you see here, James Madison, he wrote the first draft of the Constitution. It was called the Virginia Plan. He headed the committee that did what we call today the Bill of Rights. And what you find is, and people don't understand this today, the Bill of Rights was originally established to protect only against Congress. Right? People forget that. So, Congress cannot establish a national church. States could, and a matter of fact, Massachusetts had its own state church until 1833. Now, what happened is, about 100 years after that, the Supreme Court began through a process called selective incorporation to apply various provisions of the Bill of Rights against the states. The result of that has not been good. It's not been good, and of course, that's part of the reason Convention of States exists. Madison, at the time, was much more worried about tyranny occurring in the states rather than in the national government. He thought that the large, extended commercial republic, with a multiplicity of economic interests and a multiplicity of religious sects, would provide the matrix out of which moderate democratic dialogue would emerge and moderate policies. But what happened was the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were really 4 acts from the John Adams administration. And suddenly, James Madison became much more of an anti-federalist for the rest of his career. So, and he lost some of the French philosophe rationalism, we'll call it, that animated him during the construction of the Bill of Rights. For example, Madison wanted freedom of conscience to also be protected under the religion clauses, meaning freedom to be an atheist. Right? That was rejected. Not only was it rejected, but a number of states for years, you had to be a religious believer to run for office. Right? So, in addition, other measures that would have been much clearer about the limitations on national authority were proposed. They were not ratified. And you'll see that if you go to Federalist 10, you'll see why Madison had so much confidence in the large extended commercial republic as really the foundation for our liberties. And the reason for that is this. He looked at the ancient democracies and he said they failed precisely because they were small, right? And because they didn't have democratized commerce, meaning capitalism. But Madison said, in our large extended commercial republic, no single faction is going to be able to proclaim a majority. Instead, because we're so split up, each faction is going to have to moderate the most extreme elements in their agenda in order to craft 50% plus one. So, in other words, the system, says Madison, will force political actors to say half a loaf is better than none. So, by the time you get to 50% plus one, a lot of the extremes, he says, will have been eliminated. And then Madison says, that's as close to justice and the general good as you're ever going to get. Right?
That's a great answer. Like, that's good stuff, Tom. Yeah, every time I talk to you, my head is just spinning. I've got a list of books I have to read now. So I hope I live a long time so I get through all that stuff. I want to close with something personal, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And I know there are other people in this room that are in the same situation. You're raising your granddaughter.
Yes.
She is how old now?
She's 12 and a half.
And first of all, special blessing for grandparents raising their grandkids, right?
Thank you. Thank you.
And our families, in a sense, have had a chance to grow up together. You know, we've been seeing pictures of her since she was a little tiny one. Lucy knows her.
Yes.
And so tell us, what's it like being a grandpa raising another generation? And do you have any advice for people out there doing the same?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, thank you for asking that. Grandchildren are as close to heaven as you get in this life. The men will understand this immediately. When you get married and you have kids, you know, as a father, you're overjoyed. But at the same time, you start to feel the weight of the world on your shoulders. And this little baby, you just kind of see yourself, you know, things are flying through space and you're dodging and weaving and trying to protect this little baby. You don't enjoy it as much, right? Because you're so focused on the duty. But then you're older when you become a grandparent, and you feel, not that being a parent isn't joyous, of course it is, but you feel that joy even more deeply. You see God at work. You see the cycle of life. And really, you know, what I'm doing here, what Mark is doing, it's for our kids and our grandkids, just as what you're doing, right? You know, as we said, talk about what does education mean? It means our future. It means how our kids and our grandkids are going to live. Are they going to be free or are they not? Right? That's the question that motivates us parents and grandparents.
Awesome. Now you see why we call Tom Lindsay our friend. God bless you, Tom. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Oh, we are so blessed as a family that we get to know people like Tom Lindsay. And we have a new member of the family that I want to introduce next. And I don't know him well, but everybody I talk to about Lieutenant Governor Beckwith tells me that he's a rock star. And they don't mean that in the egotistical sense. What they say is, look, this is a guy that's in politics for the right reason. He shares our values. He's really in the fight. He's just a regular guy who's actually taken the time out of his life to do public service and be in the fight. He has overseen Indiana's $35 billion agricultural industry. He's working to make Indiana a shining example of what a conservative state can achieve, a place where every Hoosier has the opportunity to thrive. He's also a guy who knows his history. He teaches history and constitutional literacy, spending countless hours helping to shape the next generation of Americans. He and Tom have a lot in common that way. And in them, he's instilling a love for our nation's founding principles. It's an honor to introduce Lieutenant Governor Beckwith.
I appreciate that so much. Convention of States, welcome to Indiana. How you doing? Good? Yeah. It is a joy to be with you. I'm Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith. We want you to know Indiana is helping to lead the way when it comes to federalism. We do not like Washington coming into our states telling us that they know better than we know. And the founding fathers were very clear, Washington needs to go pound sand sometimes. And that's why we're here. And so with that, I'd like to just for a few minutes, if I can, just share a little bit about, I think, how do we get from here, where we are today, to where we all know we need to be. And as you heard from Tom a little bit too, this principle of people need to understand, they need to be educated. Listen, I'm a pastor, I have a ministry background. I know two things, that God's word is true and right, virtuous and good, and when you follow it, things just work better. And I also know the founding fathers of this nation knew God's word, and they instilled those biblical principles into the foundations of our fabric, and we should uphold those foundations because things will work better. And so here's a great principle of Scripture that I think is so important for today that we have to remember. Hosea 4:6 says this. It says, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." Not because they're bad people, not because they didn't love the Lord. It's because they just didn't know what they didn't know. They were dumb, right? And I think, unfortunately, we have allowed ourselves to be dumb. We've allowed ourselves to become complacent. We haven't trained up a child in the way he should go so that when he's old, he doesn't depart from it. So we've got some catching up to do. But I'm encouraged because I travel the state. As I hear and see groups like this, people are saying, we got to get educated. We got to teach. We've got to fight to get truth back into school. I'm a constitutional literacy teacher. I love Michael Ferris's curriculum. That's what I use in my classroom when I'm teaching. It's an amazing tool to teach the truth of God's word and how it applies to our culture. And so I'm here today to just encourage you. You need to know the truth because the truth will set people free, according to John 8:32. But it's not just enough to know it. I know most of you in this room probably know the truth. I would guess all of you know the truth. You wouldn't be here if you didn't know the truth. The question is, are you going to speak the truth? Because if you don't speak the truth, it ain't happening. I'm telling you, our founders knew truth, but they spoke it out. They wrote it down. They shared it. The Federalist Papers, how many of you have read the Federalist Papers? This embodied this idea of states' rights and what the federal government shouldn't do when it comes to the states. But what was it? They wrote down truth and they shared it for multiple years across this new nation to encourage people in the truth. And so where we're at today is I think we have a lot of people in America that know truth. They're just not speaking it. I think what happened last Wednesday was a turning point. I'm not trying to say that as, I know people have said that it's kind of cliche, but I truly believe what God did through Charlie Kirk in 31 years was so amazing. And Charlie was a friend of mine. I was texting him Sunday before Wednesday. We were talking about politics here in Indiana. I've been a part of the TPUSA faith ecosystem, which gets churches and Christians engaged in civic stewardship. And so I've known Charlie for the last 5 years. And he's been just an amazing example of what it means to know the truth, but then to speak it boldly. And so the question is are we going to pick up that microphone that he dropped on Wednesday for the last time and begin to speak the truth? I'm getting sick and tired of people who are good people, godly people, but they're silent people. I don't want silent people. I don't want silence in America. I want to take you back to a story in history about the passing of the torch, if you will, because I think what Charlie's doing, what he did, he is passing the torch. I heard on the way in here, there's over 60,000 TPUSA chapters that have been requested to form since Wednesday. They only had 11,000 before Wednesday. Now they have 60,000 new requests, which is amazing. That's awesome. Praise God for that. There's a revolution happening. But there's a story in history where there was another passing of the torch. One of the greatest presidents in a lot of ways in the founding era was a man named John Quincy Adams. And a lot of it was because he was so anti-slavery. He hated slavery. He was an abolitionist. Him and his father never owned slaves, John Adams. And I don't know if you know this about John Quincy, but when his dad had to go to France, he needed someone to be an interpreter. Well, he takes his 10-year-old son. They get on a boat and they said, "Hey, John Quincy, I'm gonna have you be my French interpreter." The problem is John Quincy didn't know French. So guess what happened? As a 10-year-old, he learns French and the 5-week boat ride. And by the time he gets to France, he's interpreting and people compliment him on his French. Talk about knowing These guys are smart. These guys have knowledge, all right? So here's John Quincy Adams. He ascends to the presidency. He hates the evils of slavery. He knows God's truth, what God's word says, and he's fighting to promote God's truth in America. He actually leaves the White House, and he's the only president to ever go from the White House back into Congress. He essentially gets a demotion back to being a petty little U.S. representative, right? And he's in Congress. And if you ever go to the statuary hall, the old rotunda there, you can actually go to Quincy's desk. He used to sleep, and if you've ever been there, there's this place where if you stand in the right spot, you can hear the whispers all across the room. Well, that's where John Quincy Adams would stay, and he'd act like he was sleeping, but he was really spying on the opposition. It's pretty smart. And they'd be whispering, and he'd hear all their plans, and the guy's brilliant, man, he's a brilliant guy. And he ends up having a stroke one day in Congress, and he's basically about ready to go and meet his maker, meet the Lord. And as he's laying there dying, he's picked up by a freshman congressman. And if you know the story, the congressman picks him up and they take him to the old speaker's chambers, which is right there off the rotunda of the statuary hall. And that congressman lays him on a bed, and he later dies there. John Quincy dies there. But many of you probably don't know that one-term congressman was only there for 2 years, was a tall congressman from Illinois. His name was Abraham Lincoln. And I don't know what was said. I don't know how it happened. I don't know. Again, there's no recording of Abe having a conversation with John Quincy Adams. But here's a man, John Quincy Adams, that started this revolution to make America better based on what God's word says. And he died with this passion in his heart to speak the truth of heaven. And I can imagine if John Quincy's laying on that deathbed there and he has any type of consciousness that he's able to be thinking, he's thinking, oh man, I just wish I could have seen the day where we got rid of this scourge of evil on our nation. And he had no idea that the young man that was picking him up, laying him in the bed, was the one that God was saying, John, your mantle is being passed to this guy. And that happens throughout Scripture. We saw that with Elijah and Elisha. If you know the Bible, the Lord says, Elijah, go and anoint Elisha. Put your mantle on him. And oftentimes what you start, the Lord does not necessarily allow you to see it to full completion. But wise is the man who plants the tree so that his children and children's children can sit in the shade of that tree. Just because what you're doing here, I know we've been going through the muck and the mire, and you're saying, oh my goodness, is this ever going to work? Are we ever going to see the day where that fruit of the tree is actually finally producing what we dreamt of, what the vision was? I don't know. I'm not sure. That's not for us to answer. That's God's answer. But I do know this, that had John Quincy Adams not been the staunch abolitionist that he was and speaking truth the way that he did, I don't know if it would have influenced a man named Abraham Lincoln. And think about this, one term. He was a one-term congressman. He loses a lot after that. I don't know if you know the story of Abraham Lincoln. He continues to lose, right? If you're Abraham Lincoln, you're thinking, I'm insignificant. God obviously doesn't want me in politics. I keep losing. Like, hello? I feel like, God, you're calling me to do this, and yet I lose. I keep losing. And God's saying, hey, Abe, what I did years ago when you carried that man into his deathbed, the mantle passed, and you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how this is going to play out. And wouldn't you know it, years down the road, he becomes president. He leads America through one of the most tumultuous, divisive times in our history. And because of his leadership, we actually rooted out a scourge on our history called slavery. And we became a more perfect union that was embodying the godliness that God wants us to embody. What happened on Wednesday last week, I think is similar. when Charlie Kirk, when that microphone fell to the ground, I think what you saw in that moment, you saw a transition of that mantle that God had placed on Charlie Kirk to be a courageous lion, speaking truth of heaven and how it impacts America and the freedoms that we have here. I think you saw that mantle transfer to 12 million young people across the world, across the nation. Charlie's race ended Wednesday last week. And it's heartbreaking. My heart breaks for Erica and the kids and the TPUSA family. They're amazing people. But I also know that just like in the case with John Quincy Adams, sometimes the Lord says, you started it, you planted the seed, and now I'm bringing people in to carry the torch on. I think what you're doing here, Convention of States, is the same thing. You're planting the seed. You are leading the charge of federalism, which is an amazing thing. People, you say that word, most people don't even know what you're talking about. Go to Walmart, just try it. Hey, what's federalism? I promise you, 10 people out of 10 will not have any clue what you're talking about. Right? Okay, but that's okay. You're planting the seed. The Bible says, don't despise the day of small beginnings. You're planting the seed. You're watering. But it may not be us that sits under that tree. But I promise you this, God is faithful and his word does not return void. And we will see, whether it's this generation or the next generation, we will see the fruits of what you're doing here. So don't give up. Don't lose heart. Stay vigilant. Stay passionate. Stay bold. Be even louder. The media, after Charlie was shot, they asked me that night. They said, I'm doing all these town halls around Indiana, and if you follow my town halls, they're a lot of fun. A lot of leftists come out, and it's great. Had one got arrested the other day. So, it's a lot of fun. And she's a gem. All right, she's a gem. But they asked me, they said, are you nervous? Are you scared? Like, a lot of what Charlie did, you're doing here in Indiana, Lieutenant Governor, you're very similar in the way that you approach, dialogue with people. Like, are you going to take a step back? And in that moment, I don't know what came over me, but I just felt a fire in my gut just come out of me. I said, we will not even remotely slow down. And if anything, we're going to be louder, we're going to be bolder, we're going to be more courageous. We will not be silent. We will speak, and we will speak the truth with passion and courage. And so as I wrap up here today, my encouragement to you is know the truth, because the truth will set people free. God is the God of freedom. He wants people to be free. Not just in the spiritual realm, but in the natural realm. One of my favorite stories in American history is the story of the Black Robe Regiment. You guys ever heard of the Black Robe Regiment? Of course you have. You're the Convention of States. You guys know this. I don't know. I forget where I am. Most of the time, again, go to Walmart and say, have you ever heard of the Black Robe Regiment? People will look at you like, deer in the headlights. There was a pastor in Virginia, 1775. His name was John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg. And he preaches a sermon on Ecclesiastes during the beginnings of the Revolutionary War conflict. And again, I get this all the time with pastors. Pastors will say, we shouldn't be political. We shouldn't get engaged in politics. That's an earthly thing. We're heavenly focused. You know what? Sometimes you're so heavenly focused that you're no earthly good, all right? Don't be that way. And so John Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg, he preaches this message, and he says, to everything there is a season under heaven, according to what Ecclesiastes 3 says. And he's wearing his black preacher's robe. He gets to the end, and it says, there's a time for peace and there's a time for war. And he throws off his black robe, and underneath it is a Revolutionary War uniform. And he says, gentlemen, now is the time for war. And he leads a couple hundred people of that town out to battle. Now, many of you probably have heard that story. I don't know if you know the rest of the story. So, John Peter Gabriel had a brother named Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg. And he was a pastor in New York. And he finds out that his brother is getting involved in politics. Now, I'm assuming, I haven't looked this up, I got to go back and look this up. Frederick's probably the older brother, because I'm an older brother, and the way Frederick talked to John Peter is exactly how I talk to my younger siblings. So he writes John Peter this, older brother, letter just saying, hey, you're kind of an idiot, all right? You should, that's my translation, all right? And he says, you shouldn't be engaged in the political dealings of this world. You're a pastor. You should just focus on the things of heaven. And John Peter Gabriel writes back a letter and says, what are you talking about? God's the God of liberty in the spiritual and in the natural. And if liberty is under attack anywhere, we should be the ones standing up and defending the people. And so he writes this passionate letter back. And Frederick gets it and is like, well, okay, I disagree with you. Well, wouldn't you know, here's what happened in the Revolutionary War. You had the British, they would always go into towns when they were fighting the colonial army. They would always go back, or they'd always go into towns, and they'd do two things. They'd imprison the pastor, and they'd burn down the church. Or they'd kill the pastor, and they'd burn down the church. Okay, so if you're a pastor here, good luck. I'm a pastor. People always say, there's a reason they kill the pastors first, right? Because they were preaching the liberty. They were preaching the truth of God's word, which was sparking the flames of the revolution. It was stoking those fires. Sam Adams said it does not take a majority to prevail, rather an irate minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the hearts of men. That's what pastors were doing. That's what good, godly people were doing. And so the British go into New York. They come to Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg's town. And wouldn't you know it, they burn down churches, and guess what? One of his churches gets burned to the ground. Well, in that moment, Frederick Augustus realized, oh, shoot. I probably should have been engaged in this battle a little bit earlier. There's a concept here. You can't pet a demon, right? This is what Winston Churchill was trying to tell Neville Chamberlain. You can't pet a demon. You got to fight this demon. You can't just appease it. It will destroy you. So Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg realizes it's the hard way. They burn down this church. And then, and then he gets involved in the fight for liberty, which is awesome. Again, not the end of the story. 11 years later, the first Constitutional Convention where Article 5 was drafted along with the 7 articles and the Bill of Rights, all of these things were coming together. They have to get the very first United States Speaker of the House. And they chose a man who was a pastor from New York that didn't want to get engaged in politics, but then found out he had to fight for freedom, and that man's name was Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg. The first Speaker of the House was somebody that initially said, it's not my fight. I'm going to stay out of it. But then he realized, oh man, we've got work to do. And I think what you're doing, you're the John Peter Gabriels in this room. You are telling the rest of them, the Frederick Augustus, hey, guys, it is your fight. Speak the truth. Speak loudly. Speak courageously, because it's coming for you too. And I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing people wake up and say, oh my goodness, how did it get this bad? I probably should do something. So take heart. This is not the first time we've been in this situation as a nation. We have been here many times before, and every time when we turn to the Lord and say, Lord, help us, God raises up the John Peter Gabriels, the Frederick Augustus, the John Quincy's, the Abraham Lincolns, and the Charlie Kirks. And I'm proud to stand with you. I love what you're doing. Indiana has got your back. We will see the day when we have a constitutional convention called. We will see the day when we put the powers of Washington back in its rightful place and get them back on the right track because of what you're doing here. You're planting the seeds of liberty. And by God's grace, we will succeed greatly. I love you guys. God bless you. God bless America. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
So I want to start by apologizing to you because I can tell you're just really nervous and uncomfortable doing this kind of stuff. Man, it's so great to have somebody like you that's so comfortable on stage, knows their theology, knows their history. Why don't you tell people a little bit more about your background? I mean, why are you so comfortable up here doing this?
Okay.
How do you know all this stuff?
Well, yeah, so I grew up in a little town called Hillsdale, Michigan, where Hillsdale College is at.
Really?
So that's
Okay.
my hometown. So, yeah.
My daughter's a Hillsdale grad, so we're very partial.
I love Hillsdale, and my uncle was the chaplain at Hillsdale College. My grandpa graduated from there. My parents, every weekend they're going to some forum at Hillsdale College, and my dad's always telling me, you need to come up. I'm like, Dad, I'm a little busy right now, okay? So grew up there, but I had parents that love God, and they love America. And so those passions were instilled in me at a young age, and I realized that God had kind of put that in my heart for a reason, because I remember it like being seventh grader talking about federalism to my 7th grade friends, and they were like, what are you talking about? And so I just kind of knew, like, okay, the Lord may have me going down a certain path for a reason. But then I actually went to college in Indiana. So that's how I became a Hoosier. And I went to a little college called Huntington College. It's a liberal arts school. I went for economics. My parents are in the dairy world, the dairy business. My grandpa started a packaging company, and then they do flavoring for ice cream products. And at the time, my dad owned a company called Denelli Flavors. I don't know if you've ever had Moose Tracks ice cream, but my dad created Moose Tracks ice cream. So
very cool.
So that was so it was really fun watching that grow. In the early 90s, that was coming out, and my dad always had these little peanut butter cups that went in the ice cream in little sample bags out in the freezer. And so us kids, I have 3 other siblings, there's 4 of us, we always steal the samples for his business meetings and eat them. And he needed to go to a business meeting. He'd go out to the freezer, and he had no samples. He comes screaming in, "Who ate my samples?" You know. So, but anyway, it worked. And so I went to Huntington, graduated with a business and economics degree. But God had a different path for me. I went to full-time ministry. Ended up being a youth pastor. I was a music pastor, so I taught music and drums, guitar, piano, vocals, and all those kind of stuff, and led students down that path. But I realized something about 2016. Bad government policy was warping the minds of the next generation. And when I went to fellow pastors and said, "What are we going to do about this?" they said the exact same thing Frederick Augustus Muhlenberg said: "We don't get political." And I said, "Then that's the most pathetic answer I've ever said. We're seeing our kids being warped and eaten alive by the lies of this culture, and you're not going to do anything about it." And so at that point, 2016, I said, I'm going to jump into politics head first, and I did. And I became a delegate in our state party and a vice precinct committeeman, which is just a trash picker upper for the party is basically what that is. But God just continued to increase my influence. And then during 2020, as a pastor, my name ID grew a ton because our church and me as well, we wrote 4,500 religious exemptions for people around the state so they didn't have to get a vaccine that they did not trust or did not want. So once we started doing that, people said, "Man, who's this pastor that's defending our liberties? Like, let's get behind him to run for something else." And we ran for lieutenant governor and won, and here I am.
So that's your first elected office.
Yeah, first elected office. Yeah. Hey, it's like, God is for you, who can be against you, right? That's
How old are you?
43.
Tell me about your family. You married? You have kids?
So my wife Susan, met her at Huntington. 2 kids, Brody and Savannah, 8 and 6 years old. So Brody's 8, Savannah's 6. So we're living the dream, soccer all the time. And by the way, I'm starting to realize that these travel leagues are a scam just designed to
Welcome to parenthood, my friend.
It's like, wait. My kid is not Lionel Messi here. I don't think I should be paying all this money. But my wife Susan, it's really amazing. I'm so blessed. But my wife Susan, she had a strange journey in the political world, but not being political. She was actually Miss Indiana in 2005, and so she would travel the state a lot with Mitch Daniels, our governor back then, to sing the national anthem. And so she was involved in that. I mean, she's kind of like a Jackie Kennedy in a lot of ways, and it's just like, I just see what God's doing now, and I love her. She's definitely the rock that I stand on, and we're standing on Christ together. But it's just it's just cool to see how God, I would have never in a million years thought this is going to be my journey, but God, here I am. So.
And so, do you stay involved with your church? I mean, you're so busy in politics.
Yeah. So so one thing I said when I ran for office, I said, every politician, and I knew this, every leader needs to be rooted in a church, right? Like I say, if you're not rooted in a church, this world will eat you alive. Yeah. And so I told my church, and we have 4 campuses, so I'm at one campus, so there's a whole team that's making the church happen. But I said, hey, listen, I will step back part-time, but I still want to preach. And so what I do is I preach 2 to 3 times a month at the church. So yes, a lot of Sundays I'm preaching. So last Sunday I was preaching. I'll be at Charlie's funeral this Sunday, so I won't be there. But I think it's amazing because it forces me to really dive into the Word. It puts me around people who are my family. So we have a church of about, collectively, there's probably 1,200, 1,500 people that go to our church at all 4 campuses. And they're all people that know me, they love me, and they're engaged in politics. And they will tell me if I ever do something stupid. And they do that a lot. And so, but I want that. I said, like, you guys need to hold me accountable. I'm not perfect, and I want you to call me out when that happens. So it's really worked well, and I love it, and I plan on doing it for the foreseeable future.
So do you have a I want to phrase this correctly, not your favorite verse, but your favorite verse for politics.
Yeah, John 8:32. You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That's literally the embodiment of what we're fighting right now. Charlie Kirk's shooter, the assassin that took him out. Why did he do that? Because he didn't know the truth. He was warped with lies, demonic lies from the pits of hell. Why are our kids falling away from everything that is American values? Because they don't know the truth. Why are things like CRT and the 1619 Project and just DEI and all of these things that are just taking over our kids and destroying them? It's because nobody knows the truth enough to be able to push back on these lies. And so I think John 8:32 is really that. And then maybe the second verse I'll add to that is Exodus 15:3. The Lord is a warrior, Yahweh is his name. God goes to war to defend what is good and true and virtuous and good and right. Like sometimes we live in this world as Christians like, well, we should turn the other cheek. Yeah, Jesus did say to do that, but there's a time and a place for that, and there's also a time and a place to stand up and go to war. And I'm not saying we use bullets and bombs. I'm saying we speak the truth against those lies of the enemy. That's what we're warring against. And so many Christians are like, well, I don't want to say something that's offensive.
Yeah.
I don't want to make an enemy. Do you know they didn't crucify Jesus because they loved him? They crucified him because he was offending everybody. John 6, go back and look at John 6. He says something that in that culture was so offensive, it just ticked people off. He said, if you do not eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will have nothing to do with the kingdom of heaven. Do you know in the Jewish custom, you couldn't even touch a dead body, let alone eat it? And Jesus makes this statement saying, hey, if you don't eat my flesh and drink my blood. Now, Monday morning quarterbacking, we can easily see what Jesus meant. This is the communion, right? It's like, hey, no, he gave his blood and his body for us. We need to take that in. But they thought he was literally talking about cannibalism, okay? And so in John 6, it says this, the masses went away offended. Now, in today's culture, if you work at a church or you're a Christian, you'd be like, oh, man, maybe I could have said that a little differently. Maybe I could have, hey, guys, no, I'm not talking about physical cannibalism. This is a spiritual truth. Jesus didn't do that. He looks at his disciples, and he says, you guys want to go too? There's the door. Don't let it hit you where the good Lord split, or don't let it hit you where I split you. and he doesn't say, I should have said that differently, or I should have said it in a way that's less offensive. And Peter looks at Jesus and says, well, we're offended too. We just don't have any other place to go, so we're stuck with you, right? But yet, that's the God that we serve. He was offensive. He spoke the truth in a world full of lies, and it divides. John 12:51 says, do you think I've come to bring peace? No, I've come to bring a sort of division. Like, what does a good doctor do when someone has cancer? They don't say, oh, we should embrace the cancer. Just identify with the cancer, right? No, we say we're going to cut this cancer, the unhealthy, out of the healthy. We're going to divide or kill the unhealthy that's in your healthy body. And so I think we have to understand, like, that's what God's calling us to do. And yes, you will make enemies. Of course you will. In a world full of lies, truth will be hated. Just get used to it. But that's the calling God has on us, and we need to take it very seriously.
I can't think of a better ending than that.
Yep.
Lieutenant Governor Beckwith.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
bless
Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Thank you.
I think we're going to be hearing a lot more from you.
Thank you. Thank you all. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I got to have Indiana on my list of places maybe to move, right? I was backstage.